All right, so good evening. We are live and on Book Club Babble. My name is Maribel Garcia, and we are with author Diane Y. Paul, author of Things Unsaid. Diana, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here.
No, this is wonderful. Things Unsaid is a family saga that takes you through the 20 tangle of family relationships and how these relationships influence elder care. In Things Unsaid, we meet Jules Foster, her sister Joanne, and her brother Andrew, three adults who, despite having been raised together by the same two people, all have varying views of and reactions to what role they should play in their parents' predicament. So let me have Diana tell us a little bit about the book, herself, and the book's theme, and then we'll just a conversation.
Okay. Well, the book Things Unsaid has been percolating for a long time. It was released in late 2015. But my friends and I had this group we called Ladies' Night Out, and we'd go out, see a movie, and discuss it. And lots of times we ended up discussing family dynamics. And a lot of my friends were facing the prospect of aging parents while their own children were growing to be teenagers and adults. So it's a dilemma. You have a lot of difficult choices. How are you going to fulfill your obligation to your parents who raised you, and at the same time fulfill your obligations, college tuition and nurturing your teenage children? Pretty soon you might be an empty nester. So all these problems were problems that faced all my friends, and I thought there is a story to be had here. And that inspired me to write Things Unsaid.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the characters. So you have Jules. Jules is I would say the responsible one, the one that feels that she is morally obligated to it. And we all have that one person in the family who kind of steps up most of the time. And then there's Joanne, who is the divorcee who gets treated like the little spoiled child, and Andrew, the male that kind of mom thinks he walks on water. And I think that there's all these like gender aspects to that. You want to talk about that? I mean, because that still kind of holds, where it usually falls on the daughter or the oldest daughter or the most responsible daughter, the one that's more responsible, has been more responsible with their finances, with their family. The one that has it together ultimately has a heavier burden.
Yeah, I mean, even though we're a society in which, at least theoretically, men and women are together in the family, sharing responsibilities, it's still traditionally the woman who's the caregiver for her aging parents. And right now, there are a lot of memoirs about the difficulties dealing with this, how you take care of a mother or father in the role reversal, and how parents never expected their kids to take care of them. And with the longevity we're facing now, everybody's going to be dealing with that at some point. And it might not even be the sandwich generation, the middle-aged who are taking care of their teenage children and their aging parents. It could be the young children, the millennials. You don't really know who's going to be the caregiver. It might skip a generation. And so this was kind of the pulse of our time, I think. And that's why I wanted to deal with it. But it's just as much a story about the siblings. Because when you're dealing with how to care for an elderly relative, the brothers and the sisters have to come to some kind of agreement, or at least they're going to discuss this. And so the siblings and the conflicts between the siblings as adults and the gulfs between the three siblings in the story were just as much of the story as the actual issue of caregiving.
How did when you were planning out the structure and the narrative arc of the novel, how did you come up with these three personalities, Jules, Joanne, and Andrew? And how did you draw, or did you, from any of your own experiences?
Well, I drew the three characters as composites from, as I said, my Ladies' Night Out. And there were quite a few stories about a diva mother. The mother, I don't want to say the mother from hell, but the mother who really didn't know how to be a mother. And so I played around with just a son and a daughter. So you'd have the male role and the female role. And then you'd have like the favored son because it was the only son. But then I thought, if one daughter is very close, you get one issue towards how the response is going to be in the dynamic.
Right.
So I wanted to have one who was close to the mother and one who felt an obligation but wasn't close to the mother, and the mother wasn't close to her. So that's why I put two daughters in there, so I could get the female caregiving in both extremes.
I like that. Let's talk about the diva mother, because
okay.
I really that part was that was fun. And
I had a lot
how did that play out with your girlfriend's group? Because I know that I was watching, there's a documentary on Netflix called Look at Us Now, Mother. And
I didn't know that one.
Yeah, so it's one of the new releases, and there's a lot of home movies where it's two brothers and the younger daughter, who is now in her 50s, I think, and she's showing a lot of home videos, and the mom is very much this narcissist, like just, it's all about her, and this isn't fiction. So I thought about your character a lot, and how, in the novel, they're, talk a little bit about the parents in the novel are now living in an upscale retirement community, which means that the money that the older, daughter, Jules, is supposedly saving for her daughter's tuition is being kind of siphoned off, or they're it's at risk of having to pay for this kind of lifestyle that mom wants. And when she could be living in a more, less extravagant. So I don't know, what did your girlfriends think about that? Were they living some of that? Where?
Yes. In fact, I found this rather shocking, but two daughters who had put their mother into a fairly upscale assisted living community, and she was living close to 100. So, this was going on year after year. And one of the daughters said, she really doesn't know what's going on now. I think we should put her in a very modest place. And the other daughter said, this is her money. I mean, she should be able to live out her final years with her own money. And the daughter said, but no, there'd be more of an inheritance for us if we put her in a modest one.
Right.
So that's one in which there isn't really a necessity to shift, but there was a psychological greediness to want to think of herself. So it was a narcissistic daughter in that sense. So the whole idea of narcissism is extremely interesting to me, and I read a lot of, or reread several of my favorite novels to create Aida. Even her name is the diva of an opera, and I wanted to make it very operatic and dramatic. So
that was very fitting. Yeah. It's very funny. My mother-in-law used to, when one of my kids used to throw tantrums and scream, and she'd call it an Aida. So it was so funny that when I'm like, that was a very fitting name. But, in your character's case, you have, unlike the people in your group where, this was now, I think that the tension between, the Jules' husband and only daughter, and them feeling like the mom was constantly putting, grandma's needs at the forefront when, narcissistic grandma didn't have to live in a specific place. And then tell us about Aida's husband. He used to be a doctor who used to manage his money well, but then, he no longer, it didn't do very well, and it must be very difficult for somebody who has retired and to feel that kind of control that they had over their finances, they no longer have.
Well, I tried to recreate, because it's in the 50s and 60s, the Mad Men era.
Yeah.
And of course, that TV show was really popular. And Don Draper, it was all about money and superficial status. And I think men of that era, at a certain level in terms of their professions, had that attitude that who they were was what's in their wallet. And
Right.
because of that, I made Bob Whitman's whole identity be that he was the breadwinner. The men were the head of the household, the breadwinners, and the women stayed home and raised the kids. And so with that kind of a cultural backdrop, he fit into the slot of, as soon as he started losing his financial prosperity, he lost who he was, his identity and his self-worth.
What character have your readers most related to, I mean, it might be Jules because she's a responsible one, but did you have people say with Joanne, because she's a grown woman, but there's always that kid that doesn't take that responsibility for themselves, in the family. I mean, not always, but and she's the one that you want to just, were there a lot of people like, yes, I know someone like that?
Well, I also played with the birth order, right?
Right.
So the oldest one is always the most responsible and serious in most cases. And then the youngest one is always a baby. Even if she's 50, she's still treated like a baby by the parents and sometimes by the brother and sister too. So, I mean, This enabling codependency, it's not just Joanne, the youngest one, but the others were kind of treating her that way all her life too.
Right.
So the flawed characters each had to have a backstory to explain who they are now. And that's where I put the karma in, because karma, of course, is a complicated Buddhist theory of who you are is based upon who you were in the past and who you are going to become. So I needed to have that backstory of sort of their karma that's developing into who they are now, and hopefully
let's talk about that. That's very important to you, and that Buddhism plays a big part. We have somebody here that wants to know more about the karma thing, so they want to know how does, if you could elaborate on that, so maybe talk about how that philosophy plays into the themes of the novel.
All right. The main character, Jules, is raised Catholic, but she becomes very interested in Buddhism, and Buddhism influences who she is as an adult, and she's a psychologist. And the Buddhist theory of karma basically is every action has a consequence. Some of them are unintended. So what happened in your past, there are consequences, and they develop into who you are now. And the actions that you are going to be responsible for now will also be the ones that help determine or evolve into who you will be in the future. And so Jules, each of the characters, of course, goes through the arc, but Jules is the most self-aware and reflective, although it takes her quite a while before she realizes what's going on in her life and has to prioritize her life differently.
And, one of the other themes that the novel Things Unsaid touches upon is self-care.
Yes.
And I think, and it seems easier said than done. How do we take care of ourselves? You go, girl. And our families, and how do you meet the needs of your aging elderly parents? But, that you've got two families, you've got the present and these kids you're sending off to college, kids that are starting their own lives, and your own budget constraints. And then I don't want to say burden, but yes, it's a reality. And then you're caught for example, Jules and so many women, how we don't put ourselves first ever. Can you talk about maybe what your girlfriend's club, the movie night, people said about that? Like, did they say like, yes, because at its core is, how do we take care of ourselves?
Well, just as this high stakes, no-win situation, right? You choose your parents, and it may be at the expense of your own husband and children. So actually, all my friends sort of played out various different scenarios of that. I had friends who very accomplished women, and they gave up their lives to take care of an aging parent. And then by the time the parent passed, they could no longer go back to the life they had. So, I mean, some of them were embittered by that. Others just felt sort of extremely broken and dissatisfied attitude. Nobody was happy about it because they didn't take care of themselves. And those that did take care of themselves, some of them feel a sense of guilt. The mother kind of reaching out from the grave, like, oh, I should have done more. I didn't find out. The gap never closed between me as a child and my parent, and now it's too late. Right. So I wanted to play with that idea that there's no real answer because the choices are so hard. And at one point, you know you're going to have to let go and give up something in order to take care of yourself.
Actually, we have a question, and it's a really good point. Isn't having a girls' movie night a way to take care of yourself? Yes, it is.
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, it was kind of a sense of, I don't want to say exactly therapy, but it was really very comforting to know you weren't alone. And actually, I wrote that book with part of the mission being, you're not alone dealing with dysfunctional families or with these dilemmas. And there's even a little bit of humor, if you can see it. I mean, like, I think Aida is kind of a humorous character in some ways.
She is.
But I thought that the Ladies' Night Out, the reason why we did it so faithfully was because we needed it. We all felt that we needed to talk about it. And I loved it because it was the material for what I wanted to write as a novel. I mean, we really started out all open to movies and discussing the movies, but every time we ended the evening with somebody telling a story about, usually a mother, but sometimes a father.
You know, the more I hear about Ladies' Night, the more I love to hear you write about that. You know, we have another question that says,
the next novel is about a 30-year-old who's, it's a comedy, and it's about a 30-year-old who has a lot of good things in her life. She has a great set of parents, she has great women friends, but she doesn't have a guy. So she tries online dating, and she has a girl posse, and she talks to them about what's happening with these dates.
We have a question. Did you ever discuss plot lines with the group?
No, in fact, one thing that I was hesitant about, some of the friends told me stories, and they were really almost too difficult to believe that their mothers could be that horrific.
Wow.
And I ended up not putting them in there, but I did feel at times that even though I camouflaged them, that I was borrowing from their lives, and so I would mention it later. I said, you know, I'm kind of thinking about this, and I'm changing it this way, but how do you feel about that? And I never had any issue. All of my friends said, if you can share that and make sense of it with somebody else, and they feel that they can get comfort from the fact that they're not the only ones to have a mother like that, then more power to you. So
what was your group's reaction to the end product to the final book?
Well, at least they tell me that they're very happy with it. One of my friends, though, that really inspired quite a bit of it, she died before the story came out, and I was very sad about that because some of her stories were really quite essential to the novel. But the other ones, you know, in book clubs, they're helping promote it in book clubs. The other thing that I find really interesting is that since my friends knew I was writing a book, they'll say, oh, is that one based upon one of us? Or is that a true story you heard from one of us when we weren't in our group? And those are the ones I truly made up. I mean, they don't have any basis in any of my friends. They all start reading things into the story.
That's what I hear. Now, you know, I've got this, when we talked in the interview, Jules, that the main character, the dutiful daughter, you know, there's a line, she says, a good daughter is supposed to do, this is what she's supposed to do, love her mother, even when her mother doesn't love her back. And when I'm talking about that Netflix documentary and so many other books, or just our own lives, I think maybe the way we deal with our children, and where we say we love you more, or we show love in ways that are romanticized in movies, which wasn't the way it was for maybe our parents or grandparents. Mm-hmm. And I think we had it wasn't that our parents didn't love us, they just didn't show it the way it's, really how it gets played out today. So it's funny how when I read Things Unsaid, to have Jules say, that's what a good daughter's supposed to do, love her mother, even if her mother doesn't love her back. Mom did love her. She just happened to be, in love with herself. But you weren't even supposed to show love to your kids. I mean, did people talk about what of your readers' response? Because that's kind of like it's
interesting because I think that different age groups are looking at it very differently in terms of the period in which I placed it. I mentioned it's mainly the 60s. It's a period in which women's roles are changing. There's racism, there's sexism, there's still a lot of opportunity. It was a very prosperous time. And so I think one of the things that really hit home was this idea that there are many roles to play. And it seems that the mother, today's mother, is more expressive and more nurturing. And in general, women, whether they're working or they're staying at home and dedicating their every day to raising their children, that there's a difference. There's a different attitude. Each generation has its own philosophy of how to be a parent. But I think that there are still things left unsaid. It doesn't matter. There are things you're not going to, the things that are left unsaid are very powerful, but I think they change from generation to generation. So I think in the 50s and 60s, it might have been, of course, I love you, but I don't express my emotions as much. Today, it could be, I'm balancing work and family, and I'm exhausted, and I sometimes feel like I'm not giving enough to you, and maybe I have to give too much at work because work is so demanding right now. But I don't think many young women can say that to their children.
Mm-hmm. We have someone who wants to know,
but they're different.
More about the title and the concept of Things Unsaid. I love this title. It's one of those, really good titles, which I still can't come up with. And one for me. So can you tell us about what Things Unsaid encompasses and how you came up with it?
Well, the story is all about secrets, right? I mean, families all have secrets. The first underlying theme that I had was that we really don't know, this is a very Buddhist concept, we really don't know another person. All we ever know is our own mind. And friends and family and your partner can reflect your mind, but they don't truly know your mind. Each one of us is a very discrete character. So then I thought, what about the parents? You really don't know your parents except as parents. And so that's what I wanted to deal with as Things Unsaid. Parents and children are really put into slots, and their whole wide personality and who they were besides being a parent is for the most part unknown to the child. And from the reverse side, the parent only sees their child as belonging in my family and not necessarily moving away and having their own family. At least in Things Unsaid, the mother and father can't see their 3 adult children with their families and their responsibilities being the priority.
Right. Anybody that's written a novel or likes to read novels, but that once you spend that amount of time, there are so many things you're working out. And where you start, of course, is not necessarily where you end up. So after you finished, the novel, did you learn things about yourself or how you were looking at these themes that were radically different?
That's a really good question, because I changed the beginning every time I change the end, you know, as a writer too, that the end impinges upon the beginning, and you know, you
Right.
bookend it, right? So every time I change the ending, which I think I changed 5 or 6 times, I had to change the beginning. And you could ask, well, what did you learn about yourself from it? I think I learned I really like endings that are somewhat ambiguous, because I think the reader really finishes the story. So I was trying to
Right.
be respectful of the reader and think, now, would my reader like to connect in such a way and create this kind of ongoing story if he or she were to continue the story of Jules and her family? So
Right.
I had so many different ways of how that, like, without spoiling anything, you know, Mike and Jules, how many ways could they have resolved the issues that they faced? And I
Right.
rewrote that so many times.
Oh, yeah. So we have someone that wants to know, how much do you practice or study Buddhism, or was this just research for the book?
Oh, I'm a former professor of Buddhism, so I taught it at Stanford, and I meditate every day, and I think of writing as a type of meditation.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a type
Wonderful.
of meditation for me.
One of the things, especially as I read your novel, that what I kept thinking of, because my mother's dealing with a lot of this, and and so just watching her deal with both of my grandparents, and throughout the process, my grandfather has since passed, but thinking, okay, we're coming up, and thinking, how are my siblings and I going to deal with this? Just so many things to think about and talk about. I think that, in your novel, they were very fortunate that they were pretty healthy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and but so many people are, they were pretty active and healthy, but you've got end of life care decisions and so many things that you have to be dealing with. What I don't know, how have people, readers, reached out to you, and how has it helped them to kind of be able to navigate these kind of
So
situations in their own lives, like, to know that they're not alone?
basically, I think the contribution that I made with Things Unsaid is that you're not alone, and that your situation is unique in some ways, so depending upon health and financial resources and your own relationship. And I just co-authored an article that's going to be coming out, and the other author wrote a memoir about taking care of her mother, and the relationship wasn't a good one, but at the very end there was a redemption and healing, so that she felt that she had done what she could so her mother could have a peaceful end. And so I've had other readers say that regardless of what the relationship is, whether it was a close one or not a close one, that just the role of caregiving is so demanding and stressful. And it depends upon the person and the resources and the siblings, and trying to keep the lines of communication open so you can do different things. Maybe one person can provide more financial resources, another one provides more emotional, another one does the more practical things of cooking and laundry, depending upon where they live, close to the parents. It's so complicated, and it's only going to get more so. And we need a safety net so that we can take care of our elderly relatives with compassion and respect.
Right. We have a question. It seems like it's better to have a plan long before anything becomes necessary, to open dialogue with siblings and even the parents. But that always seems so much easier, like when I was reading your novel, I was thinking that. And, before Grandpa died, I was thinking that. And then you just want to make it go away, make it go away. And next thing you know, you're in the middle of a crisis, or
Yeah.
someone's in hospice, or you have siblings at the other extreme who want to make a very different decision. But that's like a really good question. When are we going to get there, when we really start having these conversations, that it's a given, not something that the select few plan ahead?
Well, I think denying your mortality is just a very fundamental thing we all do.
That's
And
true.
that our daughter's in her 30s, our son's in his 20s. And for years we've brought up, sort of lightheartedly at Christmas time. Well, when we're not here, who would like my favorite book? Or who would like this? And sometimes they would be so sad, like, oh, don't talk about that. You're so young. Oh, don't talk about that. And I said, oh, it's just something that we'd like to know, because who knows? It'll go to Goodwill if you don't want it, if you don't have any sentimental value. And we're not so romantic. We think that you're going to want everything the way it is. So we should talk about this while we can talk about it. Right. And I think that's an easy way to gently broach the subject of mortality by talking about things. But I know with my parents and with my husband's parents, they didn't want to talk about things unsaid, but they had very concrete plans. Mm-hmm. So that made it easy for us. And I think on the part of the people who are going to need the care, you're doing such a wonderful service if you can help your children by letting them know what you want way before you ever need it. And so we decided we had this good model from them, and that's what we're going to try to do. It's sad to do, but if you do it and you write it down, some of it's being written down, and the rest of it is just, as I said, these sort of casual things at a fun-filled event, like a family vacation or something. It's not quite as disturbing in the sense, let's not talk about it. It's too depressing. And so we try to slip in little bits of it here and there.
Right. Now, you've mentioned in interviews that your parents are deceased, but they were alive when you started writing the novel. Yes. How much did they know about it, and what did they think?
Well, at the beginning, Things Unsaid was going to be a murder mystery. I mean, I had it sort of as a mystery, and I'm going to continue it after this comedy is finished, my rom-com. I'm going to go to a mystery and pick up where Things Unsaid left off. So they didn't really see it in the shape that it's in now, because I've gone through so many drafts and revisions, and I dropped characters. But neither one of them was really much of a reader, so I don't know that they would have read it.
So wait, does that mean we're going to have part 2 of Things Unsaid?
Yes. The third novel is going to be about Things Unsaid later, yes.
Oh my gosh, I bet you Joanne has something to do with it.
The ending, it kind of leaves you a little bit in certain things are hanging up in the air. And that's why I wrote the ending that way too. I mean, I had more closure. Yeah. And more of a, let's say, happier ending. But this way, it can continue.
Well, that's a good place to leave off the interview, because there's so many things I don't want to ask because I don't want to spoil it, and I want our readers to go out and get the book. But now I'm like really curious, and I'm going to have to go back.
Let me say something about the Audible, though. I almost forgot. Remember the Audible?
Please tell us about the Audible.
Okay. The Audible was released 3 weeks ago, and if anyone signs up registered while we were talking, or even while they hear it, then those emails will go into a selection process, and I will pick one to be a winner of a free copy.
Wonderful. And if you could send Book Club Babble a link, we'll make sure our readers get it on the site as well. Okay, I will definitely do that. Wonderful. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Maribel. You asked the best questions. They really make me think. You make it easy. It's a good book and good themes. And thank you very much. Thank you, Maribel. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.